Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, October 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Iowa game is tomorrow, the game against Michigan in 36 days. Those Iowa Hawkeyes present a really interesting matchup for Ohio State this weekend because they are so solid on one side of the ball and what's the opposite of solid? Liquid, gaseous? Maybe we'll go with gaseous. They are gaseous on the other side of the ball. Buckeyes also getting back to a few key contributors this weekend. Could be as close to fully healthy as we've seen them since the first quarter of the Notre Dame game, so that's pretty interesting. My guest today is one of Buckeye Huddle's X's and O's gurus. He's going to help us break down sort of what to expect this weekend from Ohio State and Iowa, Ross Fulton. Ross, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here.
So let's start with the Iowa offense because everyone loves a good train wreck. The talent over there is obviously not Ohio State level. And this is not, one of the things that I've sort of looked at this year as why is this year so much worse than some of the other years is this is not really what you'd think of as an Iowa caliber offensive line. Maybe Kirk Ferentz should have looked further than the people in his family's Christmas card photo for his last offensive coordinator search. But still, the offense is just bad. It's really, really bad. You can look at any stat you want and it's like, nope, they're bad. They are bad in all of the ways you can be bad. So when you look at them, like what are the issues? I mean, personnel scheme, what is overall philosophy from Kirk Ferentz? What are the issues that you see when you look at Iowa's offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on one of them, which is the offensive line. Like the system per se, I mean, it puts a lot on being able to run wide zone effectively and then being able to play action pass. And they just, when you don't have the offensive line that provides you the ability to do it, there just isn't a lot of other things to go to. They can't, by definition, they're not spreading you out. So they're putting more on, they're not throwing reliefs. They're not getting the ball outside quickly. And so it's really has to be offensive line driven, and they just don't have that. Spencer Petras, I mean, he has a good arm. Like you'll see him, like when they played Michigan, like he had a couple drives where like he was playing pretty well, and like he can throw the ball deep. I mean, I'm sure they'll try to go after, Ohio State's corners with some deep outside throws. But once you cloud the picture on him, he starts to struggle, and they just don't have the time to protect him. And obviously he's not very mobile.
So, this is kind of a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is Jim Knowles' defense and, what he's trying to do on defense and confusing the quarterback and, rushing from all sorts of different angles and you have, offensive linemen blocking air, all the stuff we've talked about all this fall. Does that make this a particularly good or particularly bad matchup for Iowa?
I mean, I think it's a bad matchup for Iowa because they can't win up front. Knowles has been very good at fitting the run this year. They throw a lot of complexity at an offense. In theory, running stretch should help with that because you're doing your zone steps and you're handling it. But, I think that it's just going to be, it's, putting a bad offense against a good defense that has more talent. I do find these games interesting, because, as I think Knowles talked about it this week, like, he set his defense up with like the spread world in mind, right? Like, I think he was referencing Tennessee, but he's like that's the design of the defense is to like defend, the Tennessees of the world, which is essentially like running the Art Briles system for Baylor. So he's like, that's what I got exposed to a lot in the Big 12. And so this is sort of like a change back. And so, again, some of the same questions that some would have never gotten resolved because of injuries and whatnot is like, versus when I was in two tight ends with a fullback, are you keeping Tanner McAllister on the field? Are you bringing in a bigger body? Who is that? We saw Josh Proctor in that role for a play against Notre Dame, against Wisconsin when Lathan Ransom wasn't available. So Proctor had to be the boundary safety. You saw Sonny Styles doing it. They've also used sort of a 3-4 with Cody Simon as a Sam at times. So we'll see again how Knowles offends it. But, on the flip side, this is essentially the last of this type of offense, sort of the pro style under center. Obviously Penn State and Michigan use a lot of two tight ends, but they are shotgun teams that are going to, read RPOs and run reads.
All right, so that's the Iowa offense, and there's not a lot positive to say there. On the other side of the ball, it's really kind of the polar opposite. I mean, the roster is not exactly loaded with 5 stars, so it's sort of similar in some ways in terms of like level of personnel, maybe. But everyone you talk to about the defense, the Iowa defense, we just heard this all week from Ohio State players, Ohio State coaches. It's just the same basic thing. They do what they do. It's not flashy. They just do it really well. They're just going to execute it. They're going to know what you're going to do in response before you do it. So can you just sort of explain, okay, we know what Iowa's going to do. So what is Iowa going to do on defense? And then how would you try to attack it if you were Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson?
They're going to sit with a lot of too high split safeties. Is like the shortest answer. Like their base framework is like cover 4. Like we've talked about, I think quarter, half before, like you play cover 4 to one side and cover 2 to the other. And they just basically make you matriculate the ball down the field. Again, like to use Michigan as an example, like obviously Michigan is a run first team that's really effective running the football. And Iowa like basically gave them numbers in the box and sort of let them run it. And then, their goal is to, make you make a mistake or get down the red zone where they can tighten things down. I mean, they will, as Ryan Day talked about this week, like they do know their system so well and their tendencies. So like, Phil Parker, their defensive coordinator, like he'll break tendencies, like he'll send a fire zone to play like 3 deep, 3 under behind and like try to catch people off guard. But they're reading patterns, they're breaking on the ball. But it's essentially a bend but don't break, for lack of a better word, that they execute very well at not breaking.
So essentially they're trying to make you just very methodically go down the field, and they hope they get you the one time on third down, they get you off the field, or you get down to the red zone and you're kicking field goals instead of touchdowns. Is that sort of the overarching goal there?
Exactly. And they know enough of their tendencies, like unlike the offense, for instance, like they know like when to change things up. They recruit to the system, and they execute it very well, and like they play very well up front as well. Like they, technique wise, they're very good at controlling blocks at the line of scrimmage, and letting linebackers run to the football.
Well, it's going to be a little different for Ohio State this weekend than it has been for a lot of the year, and it's not official yet, but based on everything we heard from players on Wednesday night at the Woody, it sure sounds like Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be back this weekend, along with Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson. So, beyond the obvious catch passes and carry the ball, what does getting these guys back potentially open up for the Ohio State offense this weekend?
Yeah, so with Smith-Njigba first, like, I think we've talked about this, but he, there's such a limited sample size, right? But the plays that he's been in there, like teams have defended Ohio State differently. They are looking a lot of times to like bracket the slot or find different ways to essentially double team him, cut a crosser from the opposite safety or play like cover 4 brackets. That obviously creates single coverage or less opportunities for the other wide receivers. I've sensed when he's not in, you see less of an emphasis on that, a concern about one receiver to the exclusion of others. Michigan State a little bit started doing that with Abuka in the slot, but I think that Jackson Smith-Njigba, like he sort of has a gravitational pull to him that then will open up things for other receivers. And it'll be interesting now to see, do teams continue to do that now that they have 6 weeks of seeing Abuka and Harrison? With Williams and Henderson, I mean, part of it's just like neither of them can, you don't want either of them carrying it 30 plus times a game. I mean, Michigan's doing that with Blake Corum, and, he's hanging up so far, but it's a long season, right? And so, Henderson in particular, I don't really think he's a guy who can handle, above 20 carries. And so, I think they each bring their different strengths. I mean, I think Williams certainly in the, red zone and goal line situations is really good. Which again, Iowa, as we were talking about the bend but don't break. I mean, one of the reasons that, I think the Michigan score was like 27-11 or whatever against Iowa, but they were part of it. The reason they held them to 27 again is that they forced multiple field goals. So Ohio State's been so good this year at not kicking field goals in the red zone. And Iowa probably provides the toughest challenge on that front. And so, I think having those two running backs, just being able to go back to a, where they're each playing about half the time and each getting, 15 carries, should just make for a better offense.
All right. Speaking of Michigan kicking field goals, before I let you go, I did want to ask about last weekend's Michigan-Penn State game. I went in expecting Michigan to win by a couple scores and thought, boy, this is really optimistic for Michigan. And then it was, way more of a butt kicking than even I was expecting. So, is that Michigan really being that good? Is that Penn State not nearly being as good as people were thinking a couple weeks ago? And how much of a concern is all those field goals in the red zone for Michigan? That feels like something that maybe catches up with them at some point against a better opponent.
Yeah, agreed. So Penn State, I'm not a fan of Manny Diaz as a defensive coordinator, and I didn't think it was a good hire at the time. And that was sort of borne out on Saturday. Not to take anything away from, like, Michigan is a very good run team. Like, if there's one area where, like, Jim Harbaugh excels, it's like creating different gaps in the run game. Like, they have a very diverse run game. Blake Corum, to me, is the best running back in the country this year. You have to deal with the reliefs, and you have to deal with McCarthy as a run threat. So it'll definitely shut you out. And so if you do all that and then you're not gap sound or fitting the run correctly, they're going to gash you. And Penn State is just like, Diaz, like, defenses just are not disciplined. Like, they don't fill gaps correctly. They didn't adjust to motion correctly. So, like, it kind of was like watching Ohio State play Michigan last year, where, like, if you're leaving gaps undefended, they're gonna get you. So, I do think the kicking field goals is a problem. I mean, I think, part of it goes to, you still have to, like, we still haven't seen, like, the game really be put on JJ McCarthy's shoulders too much. Indiana, of all people, was able to do that a little bit, and he came through, but it's still Indiana. And obviously, like, against Penn State, they ran McCarthy more than they would against your, like, average Big Ten team, which I guess, shouldn't be a surprise. But, there's definitely a tier cut between Penn State and Michigan this year. So I think, fortunately for Ohio State, they play Michigan at home and at Penn State, which is how you would choose it. Penn State still has some good players. It's just, like, schematically, they're just way behind where Michigan and Ohio State are.
All right. Well, Ross, thank you for joining me and being part of the morning show, but also thank you for being part of the pregame show. If you enjoy hearing Ross talk about football, you'll be able to hear him do that on the pregame show for Saturday's Iowa game. You can find that at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. You can also find Ross writing every week at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Fantastic insight from him. We have a whole team of X's and O's guys. So if you like getting a little smarter about football, hearing about some scheme stuff, and just, learning stuff you can't necessarily learn everywhere else, a great place to do that is BuckeyeHuddle.com. So sign up to become a member today. Treat yourself to 30 days. What the heck? You deserve it. I say you deserve it. So treat yourself at BuckeyeHuddle.com. It is less than 50 cents a day. So this is really not much of a splurge. And you get access to our whole fantastic team of X's and O's guys, Ross and Justin Whitlatch and Devin Radcliffe, but also Tony Gerdeman, Kevin Noonan, and I covering the team. And of course, the great Mark Givler and Alex Bleitman killing it on the recruiting beat. We cover Ohio State football from every possible angle, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.